That's the fundamental problem. Republicans are willing to secure power by gerrymandering and voter suppression, whatever other means they can. So you can choose fortifying democracy or choose working with Republicans, but I don't see how you can choose both. Eric Holder served in the Obama administration as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. He now chairs the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which is working to end gerrymandering and stop voter suppression heading into the next election. And he joins me now. I want to start asking you about that quote by Ronny Jackson, because he really, I think that is a widely shared view of House Republicans. They're very confident they're going to take the House. And the reason they are isn't necessarily because of political wins in their favor. They think they can cull enough seats just through redistricting in states they control. Should we be okay with that as the means by which a party takes power?
No, obviously, we should not be okay with that. That's something that we have been fighting at the NDRC since we began back in January of 2017. Now, he is correct in the sense that that is what Republicans did the last time we redistricted in 2011. They put in place gerrymanders that have lasted for the course of this decade. It's a gerrymander that led to Republicans in that first cycle after redistricting the 2012 elections. Republicans got 1.2 million fewer votes for the United States House of Representatives than Democrats did, and yet got 33 more seats. We look at Wisconsin, where Democrats have gotten 54% of the vote, both for Congress and in state legislature, and end up with about a third of the seats. And so the possibility of a gerrymandering to achieve the results that you saw in 2011 is there, and it's something that has to be met. It has not gotten sufficient media attention. It has not gotten sufficient attention around the country. We focus on voting rights, and I get that. That is extremely important. It is extremely important. But, you can have everybody fight their way through all of the obstructions that Republicans are going to put in place and run into a wall of gerrymandering that will basically negate the participation of huge numbers of people, and not only people of color. That's we got to get away from this notion that somehow or other this is a black fight or this is a fight for people of color. This is an American issue. This is about the kind of democracy that we want to have. This is about keeping our system consistent with our founding ideals. This is something everybody ought to be focused on. Everybody needs to learn about, and it's why I focused on fighting against partisan and racial gerrymandering in my post-government life.
Yeah, and I want to focus on that for a second, because there's a really important aspect to this. So when Joe Manchin says, look, it's 800-page bill, there's all this stuff in there, and it's true, the For the People Act has a lot of provisions, and a lot of it, there's a lot of campaign finance stuff, which was just put aside. There's voting access. But independent commissions, nonpartisan gerrymandering is a big part of that bill. And it just seems to me that, there's two things to note about that. One is, it really would be nonpartisan in the sense of there are states that Democrats control where they could probably put the screws to Republicans on redistricting, and they would have to have independent commissions too. Like, it genuinely is, the proposal in that bill, a legitimately neutral means of handling this problem.
And it's, in fact, the thing that I think distinguishes us at the NDRC from those who oppose us. We support 100% the implementation of nonpartisan, independent redistricting commissions. In fact, we have fought to get them put in place in Michigan, in Colorado, in Utah, got one in Missouri that the Republicans then gutted. Republicans never say that they are in favor of that. They understand that they've got to keep their thumb on the scale. They have to have an ability to impact the redistricting process in an unfair way if they are going to hold on to the power that they got illegitimately in 2011. So, yeah, independent commissions are, I think, the best way to go about the redistricting process, and that is a core part of the For the People Act.
What do you think about, do you have advice to state legislatures controlled by Democrats? Because it does seem to me, and I've looked at people playing with some maps in places like New Mexico, for example, where, trifecta Democratic governments can try to do what Republicans have done in Wisconsin, which is basically, put the screws to your opponents, use the power you have to pad your margins as much as possible, because until something like an independent commission happens, it's not going to get any better. What do you think about that? What would your advice to those folks?
I think we've got to fight for fairness. We don't need to do what Republicans did in 2011 and what they continue to say they're going to do in 2021. We're in a fundamentally different place in 2021 than we were in 2011. With all due respect to Congressman Jackson, Republicans don't control the process to the extent that they did in 2011. There is, in fact, a redistricting commission in Michigan. There is one in Colorado. There are reforms in Ohio. There is a legal precedent in North Carolina. There are a whole range of things that we have done over the course of these last 4 years to make the situation fundamentally better than it was in 2011. So we need not revert to lowering ourselves to do the kinds of things that Republicans do. If the system is fair, Democrats, progressives will do just fine. The will of the people will, in fact, be respected, and I think that should be the guidepost.
The reason that we're having this fight partly is because the Supreme Court has signed off on partisan gerrymandering as not in violation of any sort of constitutional principle or the one person, one vote line of cases. Recently, that same court, of course, by a 6-3 margin, basically upheld some provisions in Arizona that many thought ran afoul of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. What is your reaction to that? And what do you think about where things stand in the kind of broader spectrum of democracy protections underneath this court?
I think we need to be very worried about this court. They have demonstrated an ideological distaste for protecting the right to vote. We saw it in the Shelby County case in 2013. We saw it in the case that just came down, the Brnovich case just a couple of weeks or so ago. It essentially said it gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013. We're now saying in the case that just held, they're almost giving the lower courts a guidepost for ways in which you can sanction that which Republican legislatures are doing. The opinion by Justice Alito is frightening, not only for the results of the particular things that they upheld in Arizona, those two provisions, but the language that is in that majority opinion is truly frightening. And I am really concerned about what we see coming out of our Supreme Court. It's one of the reasons why I think Democrats, progressives, people who care about this country have to focus on state and local elections. These legislatures, these gerrymandered legislatures are the ones that are producing these laws that the Supreme Court is upholding. And not only with regard to elections, with regard to reproductive rights, a whole range of other things. And so we need to be focused on state and local elections. We need to be involved in making sure that we use the state courts whenever we can, as opposed to the federal ones. I don't think that, when it comes to election reform, that we're going to find a friend or friends on the United States Supreme Court. They are ideologically against voter protection.